Hello, everyone. I am Matthew Smith, a Jamaican historian in London, and I have the distinct honor of being in conversation today with Mr. Lebert Bethune, a filmmaker, educator, poet, Renaissance man in many respects, and also a filmmaker whose works are part of this year's New York African Film Festival. We're going to talk about some of his work, but it's first important to kind of introduce him. Lebert was born in Jamaica, and like me, he's from Kingston, but he's also a world citizen, having lived in the United States, in Europe, spent a little time in Africa, and a lot of that experience, I'm sure, has shaped his perspective in his work, and particularly in his films. Two of his films, which we'll be discussing in this conversation, are two really profound statements on moments in the 60s, moments that could also be called turning points in the struggle for Black liberation, the struggle for Black identity in the 60s, a period of 1966 and also 1965. And those films are Jojolo, which was the first one that came out, or the first one we'll speak about, which was released in 1966, and Malcolm X, Struggle for Freedom, which came out in 1967. And I think it's fitting, Lebert, that we're actually having this conversation on Malcolm X's birthday. Today would be his 96th birthday. So I think there's serendipity there, and we will honor him by speaking about him and his legacies, and importantly, your connections with him. But if I could start by asking your question about Jojolo, which I found absolutely fascinating, a film. It's a film that follows in some ways the experiences, or kind of a day in the life, really, of the lead figure, a woman, Joanne Harrell, Canadian actress. And there are so many wonderful moments in the film, from the very beginning, where we see her applying makeup, and then it's sort of bookended with her taking that off at the end of the film. But also there's this line, there's so much great dialogue in the film, so many great sorts of, sort of indication of her inner thinking, a sort of interior life of what it is like to be a Black person, and specifically a Black woman in Paris in the 1960s. And there's a line that she says that she's a stranger to the streets, but she's part of that too, which was very striking to me, because it captures that sense of that struggle to belong, but also that way in which many people who travel, who become immigrants, who have that sense of foreignness, but also a sense of familiarity in the space that they end up residing in. I wonder if you could just sort of sketch for me some of your motivations in doing this film, and really the process. How did you work with Joanne Harrell on that project?
Well, thank you very much, Matthew. I've been giving it thought over, since, for the last, particularly 10 years, when the issue of identity and identification has been so significant and at the center of a lot of conversations here in the States with part of Black people, and also in the diaspora in general. And one of the things that motivated me, it has to do, the film in a sense is really a poem. I thought of it as a poem. And in one sense, it mirrors my own sense of identification, and that going through that process. After all, being born in Jamaica, migrating, my parents migrated to the United States in 1949. I went, of course, to high school and went through that whole process of I won't call it indoctrination, of education, so being socialized. And when I came to America, sometimes people ask me, like, okay, so you came to America, and like, why did you go to Paris? Or how did you go to Paris? Were you running after, were you going after Baldwin? And I said, look, for Jamaican, my background, the main aspiration was to become a metropolitan person. Mm-hmm. I was educated and I know by heart many Shakespeare, Eliot, and so on. In fact, as a young man growing up, you were taught to keep in your head, bits and pieces that you could, aphorisms that you could pull out at the appropriate time. And so when I, got here, I was, in a sense, I had to be certain about who I identified with. Mm-hmm. I thought that I was, as the phrase is, all that, because Americans were, for me, in education terms, like a step down. I can remember, oh, you went to Harvard? Well, it's not Oxford. That sort of thing, that kind of bias. But in any event, I had to do my own adjustment. And I can remember getting on a plane and my aunt saying to me as I left Jamaica, remember, you're going to drink milk, not to count cows.
Yeah.
Okay? So like, I didn't necessarily identify with, the pressures of these people until the very end when I did articles for a magazine at NYU, and in which I was very impressed with the sit-ins and the bravery it took on the part of young African Americans to stand up to that. Prior to that, I mean, it was like, well, we should fight. Not turn, in a sense, to revolt, not to accommodate. Mm-hmm. So in any event, going through that, and then the Vietnam War, was there, and I didn't want to go into in the army. You were exempt from going in the army if you were in graduate school. So I found a way, one, to apply and go to graduate school at the University of Paris, at Sorbonne. Two, I applied in other places, including Uppsala in Sweden. Okay. And three, it fit in with my knowledge at that time of a Jamaican who had played an enormous role in the development of the Black Renaissance, or the Negro Renaissance, as they call it, in the United States. And that was Claude Mckay. I had no idea, however, that Claude Mckay was so important, because at that time, one was now getting hints of like Baldwin is going to Paris, Richard Wright has gone there. Paris, of course, is the epicenter of, modern European culture. Modernism begins there. And hey, that's where we want to be. But Claude Mckay was there.
Yeah.
And then I became familiar with the whole idea of negritude, this notion that there's an essential quality in the Black experience, in the African experience, and that quality could be referred to as negritude, and that many Francophone Africans were trying to capture that. So Les Étoiles sont noires, the stars are black. So Senghor and Diop and
Damas.
Len Damas. And so this idea was very attractive, because somehow it was this essentialist quality, very attractive. And at the same time, well, I mean, it turns out I discovered that Claude Mckay had in fact influenced Diop and Senghor and Damas. That's how the influence went. And that Langston was following Claude Mckay.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just extraordinary. So
were you interested in film yet at that point in time?
No, I was not interested in film yet. It was all writing. I mean, I'd written poetry and so on and so on, and I was very interested in the film came about because of my association with John Taylor, a cinematographer, young African American, and we, there was a small group of us, a different group, a younger group than Baldwin and Chester Himes, Bill Smith, and so on. We were kind of on the outskirts trying to, you know, to feel Africa, to feel Paris, and to gain the experience and to write from that experience. So John Taylor was a photographer, and he was an extraordinary photographer. And so with my interest in the poetry and in the written word, so we said, hey, let's shoot the film. I'm the one who would come up with the words, and you know, and the editing, of course, happened later, because we had no plans to. We wanted to interview Malcolm,
yeah,
to write an article, to send it back to America and get some dollars, so we could drink some red wine. You know. So anyway, that's my own experience then became one.
Yeah.
I mean, I was, you know, a creature of the metropolis, but African background. The interesting thing is that the Jamaican experience, and this is where there was the Jamaican experience. I remembered Africa in the Jamaican context. Of course, we hear about Garb, we hear about Rastas, but the African aspect was always denigrated.
Yes.
You know, I can hear a cousin of mine once saying to me, what's wrong with so-and-so? Is he a coffee or what? A proper name for Africa? As it turns out, that's how I got. And so I met Joanne Harrell. She lived with a friend of ours, another colleague. And Joanne was not, as it happened, particularly focused on her identity as such, in the way, in a sense, Joanne Harrell's voice is my voice.
Ah.
So it is me see, oh, wow, here she is. There is a demand of an aesthetic, a European aesthetic, in effect, from Dior. Joanne has to work, she has to adapt, she has to live. And so she holds on to that, she appropriates that. But it's somewhere deep inside of her. And some, you know, there's that horizon of unity, that is that memory of Africa. Africa, yeah. For those at home and those abroad. And in my own background, my own familial background, my grandfather, a granduncle of mine, came to America, and in 1890 odd. Mm-hmm. And he was very much a Garveyite. Mm-hmm. And so I knew that there was something positive. I wasn't quite sure what the positive aspect was, but I knew it was, I wanted to find it. So having gone through what sorry, go ahead.
No, I have so many questions, but I was really fascinated with that story. And I wondered if this relative was named Bethune as well.
No, the relative was my mother's okay. Small.
Small, okay. Related to the Judge Small?
I met Judge Small in Jamaica when I brought my students down. They were one of my first group, but we never discussed that. I don't know.
Okay, it's good. But can we we come back a little bit to Joanne? So what you mentioned just now, I thought was absolutely fascinating, because we do get a sense as a viewer that this is the interior conversation of Joanne.
Yes.
We get that story of her father telling her what Jojolo means. Right.
But Jojolo means, yes, look at a pretty girl.
Yes, exactly. But now that we have the sort of context that these are your words,
yes,
that are being put into it. So she is really performing a character of Jojolo.
Exactly.
And we're understanding that character's relationship to this space as a Black person, trying to negotiate her place there,
yes,
trying to understand. I mean, what I find really compelling is the sort of, it's as if she's having a conversation, two-way conversation with herself and her identity, exactly, but also with Paris.
Yes,
she's talking about these places, you know.
Remember, at one point, Matthew, the soundtrack accompanying it is part and parcel, because when she comes out of Dior, and walks on the right bank, which is, you know, what is, you know, the posh Champs-Élysées side. The music is Vivaldi that accompanies.
Yeah.
She crosses a bridge called Alexandra Trois, which is an imperial bridge with cherubs. Right. And she crosses over to the Rive Gauche, the left bank. The music changes to jazz.
And her wardrobe changes too.
And her wardrobe changes. Yeah. She then walks and she gets into an area of Paris where the African influence on modern art, Cubism, began. And she, as a matter of fact, I think in 1 Street, La Rue Guénégaud, she actually looks in and sees a storefront where there's somebody is like caressing a wooden statue, sculpture of an African piece.
Yeah.
And that, the beginning of, well, not the beginning, but modernism at its seminal source.
Yes.
Part of that, the art of Cubism, flat surfaces, Picasso, Braque, influenced by that. I was aware of that. So we take her across that street. We then bring her home. My father says, if you sleep in a mask, it sticks to your face. I will never sleep in mine. I want to keep my face. I want to keep my name. And then she begins to take off the accoutrements now of
the mask.
Eurocentric. Exactly.
Yeah. She's demasking.
She's demasking. So in a sense, Jojolo is my story as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's extraordinary.
But sorry, Lebert, did you write this as, because you're a poet as well, so did this sort of emerge conceptually as a poem for you that you then adapted to filmic form? Or was it something that once you had the idea, you and John Taylor worked out the idea for the film, the words then came?
Yeah, I had the idea of crossing the notion, because on a daily basis, as a young man in Paris, we cross that river every day. We're going to American Express to get our mail. We're coming back over to the left bank. And that, of course, was the Quartier Latin, the student quarter also. So that back and forth, the Louvre, all these examples of European power and culture on the right bank. So I had that idea of Joanne became the object. Now, once what I said to Jo, let's follow her on a given day. Follow her to work, follow her coming from work, take photographs of her as, you know, cinema photography as she crosses. And then we look, then it, in a very organic way, it became a part of, the words become, you know, a part of it. Just came to me. Yeah. So it's hard to dissociate the one from the other. That's why for me it's a film poem or a poetic film. Yeah.
It does feel that way. And there's a scene too that we get near the end of the film of a sort of, you know, almost like a défilé of umbrellas underneath the apartment block.
That happened just by chance. We looked out the window and there was a file of people going up Rue Savoie, it was called. And it turns out directly across the street, John focused his camera, there was a little girl sticking an umbrella outside. We looked down and there's a group of umbrellas going up the street. So it was that was just happenstance.
And that's one of those sorts of happy accidents, because I read it as a viewer as, again, concealment, you know, the way in which, and filming it that way, is the umbrella is also hiding the face. It's this, it's fitting in with this sort of allegory of not exposing your real self. And when you're outside, you have to be concealed in some way.
Yeah. It's happenstance you have, but that's the underlying theme. That is the underlying theme in an extremely profound sense, you know. I mean, the Jojo of my own, I can't remember, but to make a Jojo of my own, for I was tired of strange ghosts who lived on the green furnace of my blood, was always my destiny. So she warned me, my grandmother. And now, when I kindle again her small eyes, darting ancient love into my infancy, I remember the only lullaby she ever sang me. Me no kafi bakra whip, me no kafi fum fum, come juju come. So I'm fashioning this thing, my own juju, out of her life and our desire. I'm baking my destiny to a lullaby. Me no kafi bakra whip, me no kafi fum fum, come juju come. That's beautiful. The title.
Yes, but that no, when you put it that way, one can see that connect, because you had started out by saying about the Jamaican experience, and then one of the things about the film is that it doesn't seem to necessarily essentialize one particular nationality of Blackness. It's a sort of Black experience writ large that happens to be a Black woman in Paris.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. That is critical to it. And in a sense, the film came after the Malcolm film. After we'd finished the Malcolm film, we had some extra footage. Let's do this.
Was that extra footage you had purchased and you thought about finding a project?
Yeah, we got some help in the purchase of that film from, I said, some people of the left. Interestingly enough, it was from a guy named Joris Evans, a Dutch filmmaker, who had made a film with Langston Hughes, Hemingway in '36 of the Spanish Civil War. He's known as the Flying Dutchman, Joris Evans, celebrated. He saw our work and helped us. Okay, you know. And in fact, he was the one that arranged to have the film taken to Leipzig, the International Film Festival in 66, 67, and shown there first.
This is the Malcolm X Struggle for Freedom film?
Malcolm X Struggle for Freedom. Jojolo has been shown here a lot too, because Grove Press picked it up and distributed both films on the circuit, the educational circuit in many universities. But Jojolo, of course, is not as interesting for people, and you know, because it's not as historical, straight history. The Malcolm is more documentary history. The Jojolo is,
as you say, a poem on film.
Exactly.
Yeah. Could we speak a little bit about the Malcolm film now then? And one of the things that's really important in terms of Malcolm's biography, that's often sort of signaled by people who study him very closely, is that at that period, that last year, in fact, a little bit under a year of his life, he was going through a different sort of way of relating or translating, might be a better way to put it, the African-American Black struggle and fight for freedom, where it was being presented in this international way. And that's sort of very much at the heart of that conversation we get in the film. He talks about this sense of unity, where he says that for the Western world, the fear is not so much Black people becoming communists, is that Black people becoming together, Africanism, this sort of unity on this wider world. And he talks about Haiti and Brazil and the West Indies. If you have this sense of unity, it would strengthen the struggle, which he sees as a very universal one. I wonder about your relationship with him at that pivotal time, where we get such a very sort of deep expression on his part of where his thoughts are. And this is again shortly before he's untimely assassinated and taken from us. But what was that like for you encountering Malcolm X at that point?
Well, the two levels. One, on a very personal level, I know he was very, very wary of being followed or, you know, scrutinized, and he was extremely suspicious. And in one sense, part of that suspicion was culminated in an interesting experience I had with him, because he addressed the Oxford Union in late, I think, December of '64. And I went to Oxford, and you know, I was invited, and I sat in the audience with him, and he, as it turned out, the president of Oxford, the Oxford Union at the time, was Anthony Abrahams, a JC boy who was turning it over to Tariq Ali. He had invited Malcolm to address the union. I was with Malcolm, and you know, I was just accompanying him, and you know, because I happened to be in London at the time, and then so I went up to Oxford, and I remember the mood was extremism in the pursuit of freedom is no vice. Moderation in the pursuit of freedom is no virtue. That was the mood. And of course, there was Humphrey Barclay, Sir Humphrey Barclay, Conservative Union. And I sat in a waiting room with Hugh MacDiarmid, Lord Longsford, and I forget, there was another guy there, while Malcolm spoke. And Malcolm was, when he came after he was very, very well received, of course. And after we went back to London on a train, he was going to Manchester and I was going to London and then going over to Paris. And I was arranging and bringing him up to date on the arrangements that we had made for him to come to Paris, to speak now to a large Black audience, not only to the small group of Africans who had invited him. And that's how we first met him, when his first trip to Paris. So I was telling him, we've done this, we're going to have the Olympia, so on and so on, big. And we got on the train and we were in a sleeping car. And at one point, he left the train, the compartment, went out, and then he came back in. And when he came back in, he handed me my wallet. And he said, "Is this yours?" I said, "Oh yeah, Brother Malcolm, yeah, this is mine." No, I mean, I keep my wallet. I mean, you know, what had happened was that he had found a way to get my wallet from me. He had the skills from way back, checked my ID, and give it back to me. So that
verify that you are who you say you are.
Exactly, because he kept seeing me. I mean, I once visited his house in Astoria, and his wife, I knocked into his wife, let me in, and she said, "I'm from Paris, you know, and I've come to see tell Brother Malcolm about this, about that." And then he arrived, and he said, you let him in?" I was with my younger brother, and she said, "Yeah, but you talked about them so much in Paris." So he was a little wary there, because that house was bombed afterwards. But in any event, at the end of about 20 minutes, I filled him in on what we were doing and how we were making arrangements for him to come back to Paris. We went to his doorway, and I was leaving, and he said, "Okay, I think we gave them a good tape." When I walked out, I realized he was saying, "This place is bugged, so we've given them a good tape. Whoever is in this." So he was very, very aware of that. So that's on one level, it's personal safety, and you know,
very understandable given what he had to endure, the death threats and all of that.
Exactly. Yeah. And then we would ask him questions. "Brother Malcolm, how many people are in your new group, the Organization of African American Unity?" And he would say things. He said, "Well, you know, just you don't dig the roots of a tree, because if you dig that, you expose the roots, you kill it. So, you know, you guys are asking too many questions." Mm-hmm. But the key thing was that he had also been poisoned in Cairo. We don't know who did it, but he confided to us that he had been poisoned in Cairo. This is months before his assassination. Yeah. Now, in terms of his, what he thought of, his views changing, we only explored those views in the film. Brother Malcolm, for example, who is the Black man? Well, the Black man in the West has been a dead man, in effect. But this dead thing, you know, like has adjusted, and we will not have our day in the sun until we become unity. We have to have people of African American unity. And by Afro-American, he said, I mean, Africans, people of African ancestry in Jamaica, in Cuba, in Brazil, throughout the Americas. That's what I mean by Afro-America. He used that phrase then. And of course, the key thing was, well, Brother Malcolm, What do you think, by the way, what do you think of the Chinese have just tested a nuclear weapon? Oh, well, I do hope they make bigger and better ones every day, he said, because a dark country has to learn the language of strength. And the language of strength is the only language that, you know, our oppressors, he said, understand. And so we have to unify. We have to have unity. So just as it took the unity of China to make certain that a Chinese person, wherever they are found in the world, will have respect, so it will take the unity of Africa. And of course, you know, Malcolm, there's a sense in which that was like the current, I suppose, incarnation in terms of ideas of Pan-Africanism, because Padmore talked in terms of first independence, individual independence of states, Ghana, Nigeria, and so on and so on, before Pan-Africanism, all Africa. That was, you know, the so-called Padmore dictum.
Yeah.
So the history of Pan-Africanism, from that point, from Sylvester, from Padmore and CLR, coming up, Dubois, Blaise Diagne, culminates in this notion again, a comeback of what I call political Pan-Africanism, or the political manifestation of Pan-Africanism, allied with what I call the expressive traditions of Pan-Africanism, which manifest themselves in terms of negritude and the notion of soul and the essential quality of Blackness and that sort of thing, which of course Fanon referred to, as you know, as, in his take on it, as anti-racist racism.
Yeah, yeah.
Necessary to have that synthesis.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's where Malcolm was. I mean, I don't know if that, you know.
No, that's very, very helpful. I also just want to ask more of a sort of technical question on that film. So we do have that scene of him sitting down around this table, and you have these figures there. It feels, it feels like a very, it really sort of transports you to that space. Again, as a viewer, I feel that you see the cigarette smoking, you see the way in which there's almost a slight nonchalance of some of the people around the table. You know, these two women sort of placed at either end of the table, and then Malcolm
Carlos
is at
Moore
the center.
Is the other man.
Is it Carlos Moore
That's
with
Carlos.
the goatee right beside him? No, sorry, on the other side, on his left, on Malcolm's. Yes, on Malcolm's X is Carlos Moore.
That's Carlos, yes. The two women were young African-American students who were graduated, I think, from Boston University, and were traveling through Europe. Okay. Just, you know, like, you know, we're going to Rome, we're passing through Paris. We met them at a place which used to be the key meeting place for many, many Americans, because that's where they got their General Mail. That was American Express, very close to the opera, the Paris Opera. And so on a Monday, wherever you lived in Paris, if you were like, you know, you went to the American Express to get your mail and to change, you know, money and to meet other people, usually Americans. So that's where we met those young women. One fascinating story about those young women and Malcolm's approach to it. I myself, to be quite honest with you, was a little kind of, when we said, you've got to meet Brother Malcolm. And we took these women to his hotel, which is on, I remember, the bottom of the Avenue de l'Opera, a good hotel, very, you know, nice. And he said to us, he actually said, you know, whenever you travel, you have to travel always stay at a good hotel if you can, because you tend to meet people there of, you know, of substance. We took these young women there, and they met Brother Malcolm because he was famous. They wanted to meet him. Oh, Brother Malcolm, young African-Americans just graduated, and like, you know. And they met him, and then they left. He said to us, to John Taylor, to Carlos Moore, and myself, do those girls have jobs? We said, no, Brother Malcolm, they're just traveling through, you know, Paris, and they're going. And he said, you seem to have a relationship with them. Those girls, if they're not working, they should go back home. And he said to us, an admonition to the three of us, like, look, you guys, you young men, don't hang them up here.
Huh.
Because in his own experience, he had been a man of the streets. He had been in Harlem, he had been in Boston. He understood. If you don't have a job and you're just like, like freelancing, no. So I personally was very touched by that, because at that point, I still harbored the notion of the Black preacher as a kind of potential trickster.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Daddy Grace, Father Divine, you know, with angels, that sort of thing. So I wasn't completely convinced. And if you see the film, you see occasionally Brother Malcolm, their photograph, looks at me. He regards me with a very, very serious look. Carlos, he knew. Yeah, he knew Carlos, because Carlos had been introduced to him by the wife of Richard Wright, who helped with that Ellen Wright. And so that's how Carlos then came, and he knew where to find me and Lindsay Barrett and so on, because that's part of the local color.
So when you follow him in the car to the airport,
yes,
that's interesting. I think is it Carlos he sees
Carlos
just before he
walks up
departs?
with him at the very end.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
We would directly.
So was that right after the session, or this was another day?
A couple of days had passed. It wasn't immediately after the session. He'd gone back to his hotel. He was there for a couple of days, because in that period, between that period, we met with him. We took him to a couple other places. We took him to a cafe called Gabby's. There was an African American who had fought in the Second World War, and who remained in Paris, met a French woman, and got married. They opened a restaurant called Haynes, Gabby and Haynes. It was a soul food restaurant. It was very, very popular. I mean, people would walk in, Elizabeth Taylor, Peter Sellers. And as it happened, we took Malcolm there, because that's where jazz musicians went after their session. And they served, by the way, you know, soul food with fried chicken and barbecue and so on. We took Malcolm there, and we were sitting at the table with him. And at that point, a film called Sandpipers some of it was being shot in Paris.
Is that with Steve McQueen?
No, it wasn't with Steve McQueen.
No, it was
there was a guy named Edwards.
Okay.
Named Edwards. Peter Sellers was in it, I think.
Blake Edwards? No.
Not Blake Edwards. He was in a film. He was in one of the very, very early films. He was like pre-Sidney Poitier. Home of the Brave. He was in a film called Home of the Brave. And he was in this film, and they shot some of it in Brazil. And then they came to Paris to work on other stuff, because it was, I think, no, it's what, you know who was in that film? Who was Elizabeth Taylor's husband?
Oh, Richard Burton.
Richard Burton, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We're sitting at this table, and Edwards is kind of, you know, walking around the restaurant and, you know, a little high, and he sends a bottle of champagne over to our table with Malcolm sitting there. Because Malcolm had known somebody related to him in Paris, in Chicago. That's where he was from. A bottle of champagne at the table with Malcolm, a Muslim who has gone through the Hajj. Malcolm immediately said, "Thank you very much, but send it back. No offense, man." Another time we took Malcolm to a small jazz club in the Rive Gauche. While we're in this jazz club on a little mezzanine, and a very famous owner of a club in Paris called Les Nuages, but he was Puerto Rican, and Puerto Rican from the United States, from New York. Mm-hmm. He owns a very posh club. His public presentation of himself is like Rick in the famous films.
Casablanca.
In Casablanca, he's Rick. Mm-hmm. While we're sitting upstairs in this place, we have nowhere to go. He comes into the club. It's very late. Nobody's playing. I look down and Carlos looks down and we see him and we say, what is he doing here? Again, we have the sense of like, somebody, and Malcolm says, Brother Malcolm, he said, oh, he just wants to know what my drink is. He thinks I'm drinking the blood of the lamb. You guys are drinking the blood of the lamb. I'm drinking orange juice. The blood of the lamb meaning the glass of red wine.
Yeah.
So he was hilarious. He was very, very funny and a very mordant sense of humor. So anyway,
did he like jazz when you took him there? Yeah.
He knew. No, we didn't play any jazz for him. He liked, but he was like, it was part of the background. This was part of the background, the foreground. Okay. That's how we because we were going to jazz clubs all the time. Everybody that came through there, whether it was Miles, Sonny Rollins. I made a present of my book Jojolo of my own to Sonny Rollins on a street called La Chat Kipesh, because I was a Sonny Rollins fan. He played St. Thomas.
Yeah. No, he was fantastic.
Yeah, and so a lot of, but Malcolm wasn't. I don't know what he said to Carlos as they moved, but that was an indication of Carlos' closeness, because Carlos was the one who had arranged for us. And we were, and the house, the apartment in which we were sitting belonged to a Frenchman. He was a cartoonist, a very famous cartoonist. His name was Cine, S-I-N-E, accent to Q, Cine. And Cine put his house at our disposition. I've seen some outside footage I have extra, which we didn't use. And, by the way, Matthew, I should tell you, in the 1970s, early 70s, I shot an interview with Mrs. Amy Jakes Garvey.
Really?
And with Peter Abrams in Jamaica, and at Columbia with CLR James.
Wow.
The Smithsonian has acquired it. And I just saw for the first time myself aspects of that film. And paradoxically enough, my asking Peter
Abrams.
Peter Abrams. He was the secretary of the World Health Conference in London.
Yeah.
With Dubois and Nkrumah, Kenya. I said, and he was living in Jamaica for a long time with Koyabo, just out above Red Hills. And I said, my question is, why do you think that this notion of Pan-Africanism developed outside of Africa? Mm-hmm. I was asking Mrs. Dubois the same thing. So, and therein, lies the tale. We need more time to get into it, but.
No, that's, well, can I, and I know because of time, but I just have one more question about the Malcolm film that I was very curious about, which is the archival footage, which comes in at very specific moments to sort of match what is being said. Yeah. Some of it was very new to me. And I wondered about.
We got from Cinémathèque Française. We got it from the Cinémathèque Française. The footage of the dogs, you've seen that. The footage from South Africa, we got that. That was footage that luckily we were able to purchase and, illustrate what he was saying with that footage. The one footage we didn't have to purchase was, interestingly enough, Malcolm came and had a small roll of film with him. Mm-hmm. And that film was the Chinese footage. And he left it with us. When we looked at it, there is Chinese footage of Mao addressing large numbers of Chinese.
Is that the footage in the film that was from Malcolm?
Yes.
So Malcolm actually shot that footage of Mao and
that. He got it somewhere. I don't know who gave it to him.
Yeah, because we see him walking with a camera at the end. Just sort of slung over his shoulder. Yeah. And so I wondered what was...
I don't think that I'm not aware that he went to China and shot that, but I think he
Okay. But he probably acquired. But that's very interesting. What was also interesting was the image of Lumumba behind.
Ah, yes. Well, that was arranged by Cine. That we set that up literally, just as I have this image.
Okay.
There's one image I want to show you very, very quickly, if I may.
Sure.
Yes, Matthew. This is the Malcolm film. Can you see that?
Ah, yes. And that's you. That's right. A still from the film.
Exactly. Okay.
Wow. Was that John Taylor who took that shot?
Yes, John Taylor. That's Tanzania, and that's Langston Hughes.
Oh my. Wow, that's a lovely one too. Is that a poem that he wrote for you?
That's the poem that he wrote for me. It is wise to suffer illusions, delusion, even dreams, to believe that in this life, what is real may also be what it seems. What is not true may be for you. And by that he meant, I found out, like every 5 years I get a new meaning. Your idealism and dedication and looking at this horizon of the diaspora of unity may be for you. I've crossed rivers many.
What's the name of the poem? What did he?
For you.
For you.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Very beautiful. That's a real treasure. Yeah. A real treasure.
I show you, the opening of the film, the Malcolm film, has a beautiful shot, a photograph of John Taylor.
Okay. Oh yes, this one, right? Yes. That's the first shot.
Standing with those flags, it's just by happenstance. But that's and that's how
when I viewed the films, I saw Jojolo first, and I watched that. And the minute I saw that shot, immediately I felt this is a completely different territory we're going into with this film. It is so
extraordinary.
It is.
John passed away a long time ago, and I'm trying to find out somebody who has many of his negatives, so that we could do something on him. But in addition to that, the Smithsonian material, the CLR James, and Mrs. Dubois, and Mrs. Amy Jakes Garvey, that material, I'm going to really try and do something.
You should. Yeah, you really should. And so it's you have copyright for it, so you could.
Yes, I have the copyright. I spoke very briefly one time with Anthony Hill, who was who did all the work in Garvey.
You mean Bobby Hill?
Bobby, yes, with Bobby, not Anthony. Anthony was,
he was the diplomat, his cousin. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, they're related. Yeah.
I see. Right. So I spent a year. I spent a year as a cultural attaché in DC.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you. I mean, separate from when we're talking about your film career, because your name has come up in research I've been doing on the sorts of period in Jamaica in the 1970s when you were API representative in North America.
Yes. And the interesting thing, my ultimate employment, I gave up my citizenship and my professorship and everything to come down there. You see, it is wise to suffer illusion sometimes. But the guy who actually interrogated me or interviewed me, ultimate, to give me the job as the attaché and coordinator director of information, was Dudley Thompson.
Oh, wow.
He was on as a Pan-Africanist. And he asked me about Garvey, and then he said, okay, you have the job. It turns out, interestingly enough, you will find how amusing this is in a certain sense. Not amusing, but after I was in DC, right? Ambassador Rattray was the ambassador.
Carl Rattray.
And I arranged for Carl, not Carl, another one. KR. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I arranged for a seminar with Dudley, and I think I probably wrote a good part of a speech or collaborated with the Institute for Policy Studies and with Johns Hopkins School for International Relations. The guy who was in charge then was a guy named Reardon Royt. And we ran the seminar. The title of the seminar presented in DC under the aegis of the embassy, the case for US Jamaican relations, a case for dialogue as equals.
Yeah.
You see the geopolitical irony.
Yeah. But it was at a time, I mean, how the name came up in stuff I was looking at, it was at a time when there was so much negative press about Jamaica coming from the United States. And you sort of...
I came up, what I did was to say, look, I can remember the proposal I gave them. I said, look, let's go to America, I'll go back, and we will identify people in Black academia, Black media, Black church, and some entertainment, and also Black officials. We will tour with the ambassador, reach out to them, interviews in radio, television, so on, and ask them to be aware of that they're a set of brothers who have gone through the same slavery and colonialism and so on, are getting undue pressure. Yeah. Because of the relationship with Cuba. And the relationship with Cuba is not a completely political one. Yeah. I have my grandfather, who worked with the Gleaner as a compositor, I now realize spent 7 years in Cuba. You know that connection. And grandmother on the Bethune side, the Bethune is an whose name was Madame Sylvanet, and she was Haitian.
Sylvanet?
Sylvanet. S-I-L-V-A-N-U-I, yeah. Madame Sylvanet was, I suppose, what we call my great-great-grandmother.
Wow, was from Haiti. Wow. Well, I mean, those connections, you know, you scratch the surface on any two Jamaicans, you find some other islands in there, you know.
Yes. Extraordinary.
It really is.
Yeah.
After you shot Malcolm X, Struggle for Freedom, did you anticipate that this would be, when it was released, did you do it with the intention of it sort of becoming part of a document of Malcolm X's life and the 60s, or what was the sort of vision from that point on with the film?
We had no idea. We simply wanted to get it, the text, the film, a record of it. And we had no idea that what was going to happen naturally, that it would be. But what we did after that, we said, Malcolm is in Paris because he had been invited. We discovered it by reading a newspaper. I discovered it by reading a newspaper. He's been invited by a group of young Africans to speak with them because they know that he had been meeting with Organization of African Unity, many heads of state. So they had heard about Malcolm and they'd heard that, you know, of his view, which was central, Africa was central to it in international terms. And his idea was that we must take it to the level of international relations, as opposed to simple civil rights in the United States. So it's another dimension. So we then said, well, we need to make this bigger. We need to have a big meeting with Africans and Afro-Americans and people of color and people of conscience from everywhere in Paris. And we are going to take the responsibility for organizing that. And we had by that time I had some allies. The two allies in particular was, as I said, Joris Evans and a woman whose name was Marcelina Loredan. These were two very, very committed people. In fact, Marcelina Loredan had been captured and sent to Auschwitz when the Nazis took over France. She was about 16. And Cine was also part of that group. So I would say a very left-oriented group knew about Malcolm X, and they knew about us. And they knew that we were, in a sense, probably given the impression of being more militant than Chester Himes, or because those guys were like, they were settled in. You know, we were the young Turks, or whatever they were. Mm-hmm. And so we had no idea that we were planning the meeting. We planned the meeting. We got, I alerted Malcolm X. I came back, alerted him to what was going on. I told him we met up in Oxford with Tony Abrams and so on. And then I go back to Paris. And we set the meeting up, rental store. He arrives in Paris. We go to meet him at the airport, and he's denied entry into Paris. French government says, you can't come in. We're at the airport waiting to accompany him from Orly Airport into the city. We have a hotel and everything. He can't come back. So we have a meeting planned for that night. He's going to have to fly back to London. So we say to him, Brother Malcolm, we're going to go on with the meeting. What we want to do then is you call us, or we'll call you, and you can address the meeting, or at least some words to it by telephone, and we'll amplify it. We did, but the phone didn't work properly. But the meeting took place. And I think, in my ephemera, I called it, but I spoke to the meeting. I have the record of it. My introductions, Carlos's speech, mm-hmm. and the speech of some other African Americans making a kind of testament. So that meeting took place.
Wow.
That was the last, of our relationship with Malcolm in that context. I think I may have gone back to, I was in Paris when we heard the news. This is 64.
February 65,
February 65. The actual filming took place probably November of 64, November, December. I can't be quite sure. And that there you were. That was it.
Wow. You know, we tend to forget in this time that we live in how much struggle so many of the icons of the Black experience, the struggle, how much they had to endure, you know? I mean, your story just now about Malcolm when he arrived in Paris reminded me that 2 months after Malcolm was assassinated, Dr. King came to Jamaica on a visit to Jamaica. And you know, the Jamaican government did not send an official committee to greet him at the airport because they were scared of the diplomatic implications of that Martin Luther King Jr. was seen as too dangerous a figure for the Jamaican government to greet officially. So it had to be an unofficial greeting to receive him.
Extraordinary.
Which makes me think now about the importance in your eyes of these two films at a time when many of these questions about the place and position of Black people under freedom in a world that clearly still has deep problems of institutional inequality and subjugation. And when we can look back now at that period and look back at the sort of the poetry of Jojolo and the politics of struggle for freedom, how do you see that being relevant and having a sort of dialogue with the present?
Well, my hope is and has been for some time that the Malcolm film will be seen in light of struggle. I think it will be. I've seen enough examples of it being used in many other films, in documentaries. I've seen aspects of what Malcolm said, because it's one of the last significant statements made by him in a very coherent way. So, and it still has, I think, great relevance and significance. I do believe that it is, despite the fact, I'm not talking about political unity in terms of Pan-African, because it's before us. That hasn't happened, in Europe. It hasn't happened in Africa. That will take time. But in terms of the acceptance and the realization that there are certain particularities of culture which these films, the two films, stimulate. I hope that they will continue to stimulate thought, sympathy, empathy for the duration. Because ultimately, my own existence at this stage of the game, no matter what we talk about, race, we talk about culture, we're still talking about Homo sapiens. And there is still, there are still particularities. And I think, I won't go as far as Senghor to say that as Africans or African descent, we experience the world in a different way. There's a certain kind of poetic, imaginative, the Senghor of negritude. I won't go so far. But I think that the experience, the overall experience, and that overall experience which we've undergone as people, the Black people and Africans, coming into another world and merging with that culturally, that the world is a different place because of us, and a more humane place.
It's a perfect way to end.
Yeah.
Yes. Lebert, thank you so much for this. This has been extraordinarily rich